Welcome back to POMpod, the Peace of Mind podcast, where we talk about life, legacy, and everything in between. Today's episode is heavier than most, but it's also one of the most important we've ever done. Every year on August 31st, the world observes International Overdose Awareness Day, IOAD, a time when a global community comes together to take action on overdose. It's a day to remember those we've lost to drug overdose, to support the people who are struggling with addiction, and to fight the stigma that so often silences conversations about this crisis. For me, this day is deeply personal. My younger brother Jordan died from fentanyl poisoning in 2022 at the age of 32. He was kind, funny, loving, and a free spirit. We could all be a little more like Jor, as I called him. Yet all the love from friends and family couldn't save him from addiction. I share Jordan's story today not only to honor his memory, but to shine a light on the overdose epidemic that is affecting millions of families around the world, and to talk about how we can all help prevent these tragedies. I know my family's story is far from unique. In the United States alone, a recent study found that over 42% of Americans, roughly 125 million people, personally know someone who has died from a drug overdose. Think about that. Nearly half the country has felt the ripple effects of this crisis. Since the year 2000, more than 1.1 million Americans have lost their lives to drug overdoses. Each of these lives was someone's child, parent, sibling, or friend. Each had stories, talents, and love that will forever be missing from their families' lives. And sadly, Jordan became one of those statistics. The grief and trauma of losing him is something I carry every day. So in this podcast, we're going to start by looking at the state of the overdose crisis today, and then we'll return to the personal stories and what we can do about it. As we keep going, I want you to notice how these statistics and stories aren't just numbers. They're reminders that every life lost leaves behind a ripple of grief, and that our voices and actions can push back against silence and stigma. We are living amid an unprecedented overdose epidemic. By many measures, drug overdose has become one of the worst public health crises of our time. To give some perspective, in the United States, over 107,000 people died from drug overdoses in 2022 alone. That's roughly equivalent to losing an entire large city of people in 1 year. Drug overdose is now a leading cause of injury-related death in America, surpassing car accidents and even gun violence in many areas. In fact, for Americans aged 18 to 45, the leading cause of death is not car crashes or cancer, it's fentanyl overdose. Let that sink in. The number one killer of young and middle-aged adults in the U.S. is a drug that most of us hadn't even heard of 20 years ago. So what is fentanyl, and why is it so deadly? Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid painkiller that is extremely potent, about 50 times stronger than heroin and 100 times stronger than morphine. It was originally developed for severe pain management, like in cancer patients, but in recent years, illegal labs have been marketing fentanyl and selling it on the black market. Because it's so potent, a tiny amount can cause a person to stop breathing. Drug dealers often mix fentanyl into other drugs, heroin, cocaine, counterfeit pills made to look like Xanax or OxyContin because it's cheap and powerful. The result is that people frequently don't realize they are taking fentanyl. They think they're using another substance, but that substance is secretly laced with a lethal opioid. This is why some advocates, and I count myself among them, call deaths like my brother's fentanyl poisoning. It highlights that many victims were essentially poisoned by a drug they didn't intend to take. As one grieving mother explained, there is a stigma when we say overdose, and the public thinks, not my family, not my kid. People aren't listening if we call it an overdose. Let's call it poisoning. Whether we use the term overdose or poisoning, the fact remains that these deaths are often accidental. Jordan wasn't trying to die. He struggled with addiction. And one night he used what he thought was his usual drug, but it contained fentanyl and it killed him. And this story has played out tens of thousands of times around the country. To illustrate the scale, of those 107,000 overdose deaths in 2022, over 2/3, around 74,000, involved synthetic opioids like fentanyl. Fentanyl has driven what public health experts call the third wave of the opioid crisis. First came a rise in prescription painkiller misuse in the 1990s, then a rise in heroin use in the 2010s, and since the mid-2010s, fentanyl and its analogs have flooded the drug supply, causing overdose rates to skyrocket. This isn't just an American problem, though the U.S. has been hit especially hard. Globally, more than 100,000 people die from drug overdoses every year, and about 80% of those deaths are due to opioids, things like fentanyl, heroin, oxycodone, and other opioid drugs. Virtually no community is untouched, urban or rural, rich or poor, across all races and backgrounds. If you think not in my town or not in my family, statistics and countless stories show otherwise. Addiction and overdose do not discriminate. The COVID-19 pandemic only worsened the crisis as isolation, economic stress, and disrupted treatment services led to higher substance misuse and record overdose numbers in 2020 and 2021. The United States saw its highest ever overdose toll in 2021 and 2022, both years over 100,000 deaths. However, there is a small glimmer of hope on the horizon. Provisional data suggests that overdose deaths may have declined in 2023 and 2024 after those peak years. Early CDC reports indicate that there were an estimated 110,000 overdose deaths in 2023 and around 80,000 in 2024, a nearly 27% drop in 1 year. That would be the first significant decrease in decades, bringing overdose fatalities to their lowest level since 2019. This decline, if confirmed, is encouraging and suggests that efforts like wider naloxone availability, better access to treatment, and public awareness might be starting to pay off. But we must put this into context. Even at 80,000 deaths per year, that's over 200 lives lost every single day. It's like a plane full of passengers crashing every day, an unthinkable daily disaster. And some hard-hit communities, particularly marginalized groups, are still seeing increasing or disproportionate losses despite the overall improvement. So we absolutely cannot become complacent. A 1-year decline does not mean the crisis is over. Far from it. It just means we might be turning a corner and we need to push even harder to sustain that progress. To summarize the situation in plain terms, drug overdose is a preventable tragedy on a massive scale. The IOAD campaign emphasizes that overdose can and must be prevented. We know many of the solutions. I'll talk more about those soon. Yet stigma, misinformation, and lack of resources have hindered our collective response. International Overdose Awareness Day is about confronting these hard truths head on. It asks us to face the data, to recognize, for example, that fentanyl overdose is now the leading cause of death for young adults, and also to face the human stories behind the data. The grief of losing someone to overdose is a complicated grief. On one hand, there's the sorrow and shock of the death itself. On the other, there are layers of regret, guilt, could I have done more, and often a long history of worry and heartbreak leading up to that moment. It can be a very isolating kind of grief too, because society often doesn't acknowledge overdose deaths the way it might acknowledge, say, cancer deaths. There can be judgment or silence, the stigma of it was drugs, which makes it harder for families to openly mourn and receive support. International Overdose Awareness Day directly addresses this. It provides a safe space for public mourning, free of judgment. It says to families like mine, your loss matters, your loved one mattered, and you are not alone. On IOAD's website, there's a tribute wall where people post messages and photos in memory of those they've lost. Scrolling through it, you see hundreds of entries. Parents remembering children, spouses remembering partners, friends remembering friends. One tribute reads, "He was a beautiful soul whose life was filled with love, laughter, and unforgettable moments. I miss him every single day. Behind every number is a beautiful soul who deserved more time and more chances." That sentiment is so true. Behind every overdose statistic is a person who was loved, who had a whole life story. People like Jordan, like that mother's son, like so many others. They are the reason we observe this day, to ensure they are never forgotten and to demand that we do better to protect those still alive. A mother raising awareness about overdose after losing her 22-year-old son. Grieving families around the world have turned their pain into advocacy to spread the message that overdose death is preventable. Let's talk about stigma for a moment, because it's a huge barrier in addressing the overdose crisis. Stigma is basically shame and judgment, the attitude that addiction is a moral failing, or that people who use drugs are junkies who did it to themselves. This stigma can kill. It kills by keeping people in the shadows. People are afraid to seek help or admit they're struggling because they fear being judged or criminalized. It kills by making society less empathetic. If we view overdose victims as others or bad people, we're less likely to invest in the health services and compassionate policies that can save lives. IOAD is very focused on ending the stigma of drug addiction and overdose. One of the core messages is that addiction is a medical condition, not a moral failure. Science backs this up. Addiction is a chronic brain disorder, one that can be managed and treated, but not cured by willpower alone. People with substance use disorders deserve the same respect and quality of care as someone with any other health condition. As the campaign materials put it, we need to advance the recognition of addiction as a health issue, not a criminal one. In practical terms, that means things like using non-stigmatizing language. For example, saying person with a substance use disorder instead of labeling someone a drug abuser or addict. And it means supporting policies that treat people who use drugs with dignity and compassion rather than punishment. A phrase you often hear is, "We can't arrest our way out of this crisis." Decades of a strictly punitive war on drugs approach have not stopped overdoses. In fact, overdose rates have only climbed. Criminalizing drug use hasn't worked. Instead, IOAD and many experts call for compassionate alternatives like harm reduction services, treatment on demand, and supportive recovery communities. It's about saving lives, not casting blame. One powerful example of tackling stigma is the growing movement of parents and siblings who speak openly about their loved one's overdose death, just like I'm doing now. It's not easy to go public with something so painful, but every time we do, we chip away at the shame. We put a human face on the issue. We say, "Look, my brother was a good person who had an illness. He could be your brother, your son, your friend, and he deserved help and life." By sharing our stories and our love for those we lost, we hope to replace judgment with understanding. We also form a kind of community with each other. In my grief, I've connected with other families who've lost someone to fentanyl or other drugs, and that peer support has been a lifeline. On IOAD, many of us will post on social media or attend events carrying photos of our loved ones. Far from being a sob story, it's an act of courage and advocacy. It sends the message that no one should have to hide their grief or be ashamed of how their loved one died. This is POMpod, and we're talking about International Overdose Awareness Day. Up next, we'll shift from remembrance into action, what we can actually do as individuals and communities to prevent overdose deaths and save lives. Taking action, overdose prevention, and harm reduction. International Overdose Awareness Day is not only about remembering, it's also very much about action. The tagline is, "Time to remember, time to act." We've remembered. Now, how do we act? What can actually be done to stop these needless deaths? The good news is overdose is preventable, and there are proven strategies and tools we can deploy. Here are some key actions and approaches in the fight to end overdose. Expand access to naloxone, or Narcan. Naloxone is a medication that reverses opioid overdoses by quickly restoring breathing. It's a literal lifesaver. If given in time, naloxone, often given as a nasal spray called Narcan, can bring an overdosing person back from the brink of death. It's safe, easy to use, and has no potential for abuse. One major push has been to get naloxone into as many hands as possible. First responders, yes, but also drug users themselves, their friends and family, community volunteers, really anyone who might witness an overdose. Many states have made Narcan available at pharmacies without a prescription, and as of 2023, Narcan became available over the counter in the U.S. This is huge because it means anyone can purchase it and have it on hand. I personally carry Narcan in my bag at all times now, just like you'd have a first aid kit or an EpiPen for emergencies. Educate on overdose signs and how to respond. A critical part of prevention is making sure people know how to spot an overdose and what to do in that situation. Especially with opioids, the signs of overdose include things like extremely slow or no breathing, blue or pale skin, especially around lips or fingertips, unconsciousness, unable to wake the person, pinpoint pupils, or gurgling sounds. If you see someone showing these signs, call emergency services immediately. That's 911 in the US. And if you have naloxone, administer it. Many places have Good Samaritan laws that protect the caller and the victim from drug possession charges in an overdose emergency. The priority is to save a life, not punish drug use. So never hesitate to call for help. After giving naloxone, try to keep the person breathing, rescue breaths if you're trained, and stay with them until medical help arrives. IOAD events and materials often promote this knowledge because quick bystander response can be the difference between life and death. One more thing, even if you're not sure it's an overdose, treat it like it's one. Giving naloxone won't hurt someone who isn't actually overdosing, but not giving it to someone who needed it will cost them their life. Harm reduction services. Harm reduction is all about practical strategies to reduce the negative consequences of drug use without necessarily requiring abstinence. It meets people where they are. Examples include needle exchange programs to provide sterile syringes and prevent infections, supervised consumption sites where individuals can use under medical supervision, so if they overdose, someone is there to revive them. Drug checking services, or fentanyl test strips, so users can test their supply for fentanyl or other adulterants. And outreach programs that build relationships with people who use drugs and connect them to support. These interventions keep people alive and healthy long enough to possibly seek recovery. Critics sometimes misunderstand harm reduction as enabling drug use, but in reality, it's enabling survival. You can't get someone into recovery if they're dead. Places that have implemented robust harm reduction, like widespread naloxone distribution, for instance, have seen overdose deaths level off or decline. IOAD is a day when many harm reduction groups try to spread awareness of their services, hand out fentanyl test strips, demonstrate safe injection practices, etc. It's all about using the tools that we know exist. As the IOAD principles state, overdose prevention solutions exist. Let's use them. Treatment and recovery support. Of course, in the long run, we want to help people not overdose in the first place by treating the underlying substance use disorder. This means making sure effective treatment is available, affordable, and free of judgment. One evidence-based approach for opioid addiction is medication-assisted treatment, or MAT. Medications like Suboxone or methadone that quell withdrawal and craving allow individuals to stabilize and rebuild their lives. Studies show MAT significantly reduces the risk of overdose and doubles a person's chances of long-term recovery. Yet there are still barriers and stigma around these medications. Some see it as trading one drug for another, which is a misconception. It's more like how insulin is a medication for diabetes. We also need more access to detox programs, counseling, inpatient rehab for those who need it, and long-term recovery support, like sober living homes, peer support groups, etc. On an individual level, if you have a loved one struggling with opioid addiction, encouraging them to consider MAT or helping them find a treatment program can be life-saving. It may take multiple tries. Relapse can be a part of the journey, but recovery is possible. I've met many people in recovery who survived overdoses in the past. They often say that only by the grace of someone reviving them with naloxone or getting them into treatment are they alive today. We want more stories to turn out that way. Advocacy and policy change. We also have to address the bigger systemic issues. This might mean advocating for laws and policies that prioritize health over punishment. For example, supporting the expansion of mental health and substance abuse services, pushing for insurance to cover treatment, backing laws that make fentanyl test strips legal, In some places, they were technically classified as drug paraphernalia. Texas only recently legalized test strips, for instance, in response to the fentanyl crisis. It could mean lobbying for 911 Good Samaritan laws in places that lack them, or for the establishment of supervised consumption sites, a controversial but evidence-backed intervention in communities facing high overdose rates. One thing everyone can do is vote with this issue in mind and talk to your representatives. Let policymakers know that saving lives from overdose is a priority, that you'd rather see public funds go toward treatment, recovery housing, and harm reduction than solely toward jails or interdiction. We need a balanced approach that focuses on demand reduction, helping people not need drugs, as much as supply reduction. In short, treat it as the public health emergency that it is. Only a community-wide effort can end overdose, as the IOAD organizers say. That community includes us as voters and citizens. Education and changing perceptions. Finally, one of the simplest but most profound actions is talking openly about these issues. Educate your kids, your students, your coworkers about the dangers of fentanyl, that any pill or powder not from a pharmacy can potentially be deadly due to fentanyl. Encourage a culture where people who are struggling feel safe to ask for help. The theme of International Overdose Awareness Day in 2025 is One Big Family Driven by Hope. I love this theme because it emphasizes unity, that all of us, whether we use drugs or not, whether we've lost someone or not, are part of one human family. We have to have each other's backs. We have to approach this issue with hope and the belief that through collective action, we can save lives. Every life saved matters. Even if we can't rescue everyone, we can try, and we can create an environment where it's easier to survive, easier to help, and easier to heal. Let me highlight a few concrete things you, as a listener, can do right away. Number 1, carry naloxone. Find out if your pharmacy carries Narcan nasal spray. Many provide it without a prescription, or if a local community organization gives out free kits. If you're in Texas, you can visit naloxonetexas.com and get it shipped to your home for free. No questions asked. Learn how to use it. It's simple. Basically, you spray it into the person's nose. Keep it in your bag or home. You could save a stranger's life or even someone you care about. 2, learn and share overdose response knowledge. Take 10 minutes to learn the signs of an overdose and the steps to respond. Teach them to people around you. Post a link or infographic on your social media on Overdose Awareness Day. You never know who might quietly take that information and later use it to save someone. 3, support harm reduction programs. Does your city have a needle exchange or an overdose prevention center or outreach van? They might need donations or volunteers. Even simply supporting them against any local opposition helps. Often these programs face "not in my backyard" pushback. Be a voice that says, yes, we need this here. It's about saving lives and connecting people to care. 4, attend or organize an IOAD event. Look up if there's an International Overdose Awareness Day event near you, a vigil, a memorial walk, a panel discussion. Attending shows solidarity and can be very eye-opening. If nothing's happening in your area, you could organize a small event, even if it's just gathering a few friends to light candles and talk, or asking a local library to put up a display of information. The IOAD official website has resources and allows people to register events. Speak up and listen. Break the silence in your own circles. If you have a personal connection to the issue, consider sharing your story on August 31st or any day. or simply check in on friends or family members who might be at risk. Let them know you care and that help is available. Often a person suffering from addiction feels alone and ashamed. A compassionate conversation can be the first step toward them seeking treatment or at least using more safely. Last, fight stigma with language. Make a conscious effort to use respectful, non-judgmental language about people with addiction. Gently correct others if they're using stigmatizing terms or express the view that those people don't deserve help. Remind them that each person is someone's child, someone who didn't choose to become addicted. By changing hearts and minds, we create a more supportive climate for policy change and personal change. International Overdose Awareness Day encourages all these actions and more. It's about individuals and communities mobilizing to say, no more empty chairs, no more needless deaths. A global movement of hope and remembrance. One of the powerful aspects of IOAD is that it is truly global, and it brings together people from all walks of life. On August 31st, you might see the Sydney Harbour Bridge in Australia lit up in purple, a candlelight vigil in a small town in Ohio, a big rally in Vancouver, a memorial service in London, a naloxone training workshop in New Delhi, all in the same 24 hours. This is a collective day of acknowledgement. It began in Australia, as I mentioned, spearheaded by a harm reduction activist named S.J. Finn in 2001. She handed out over 6,000 silver ribbons that first year, igniting a spark of awareness. Since then, the campaign has grown every year. It is now coordinated by the Pennington Institute, an Australian public health organization which provides educational materials and support to groups worldwide who want to participate. How do people observe International Overdose Awareness Day? There's no single right way. The goal is to do something that honors the dead and helps the living. Common activities include memorial events like vigils with photos and names read aloud, or tree planting ceremonies, or moments of silence in community gatherings. Awareness campaigns like distributing flyers, hosting speakers or expert panels, putting up billboards that say overdose deaths are preventable with the IOAD logo. Educational workshops, teaching about addiction, mental health, overdose response, etc. And advocacy events, marches, rallies, or even public art installations that demand policy changes. A notable example, in 2018, advocates in British Columbia, Canada, placed hundreds of pairs of shoes outside the provincial legislature, each pair representing a life lost to overdose. These symbolic gestures send a powerful message. These are our sons and daughters, our neighbors, our friends. We cannot ignore this. The symbols of IOAD, as mentioned, are the silver ribbon, sometimes also represented as a purple ribbon, or a two-toned silver and purple ribbon, and the color purple more broadly. Silver symbolizes the remembrance, mourning those lost, and purple signifies courage, hope, and the commitment to end the stigma and take action. Many participants will wear silver or purple ribbons on their shirt on this day, or even tie purple ribbons around trees or lampposts in public spaces. Some landmarks are illuminated in purple at night. The campaign slogan, "Time to Remember, Time to Act," is often displayed on banners and t-shirts. These shared symbols and messages help unify the movement. When you attend an IOAD event, you immediately feel the sense of community and shared purpose, whether you're in a crowd of 5 or 500. Another powerful component is the IOAD tribute wall online at overdoseday.com, where, as I described earlier, people leave messages for their lost loved ones. It's heartbreaking, yet beautiful to read through. It reinforces that behind the activism is a well of love and grief. When I talk about Jordan, I talk about who he was, not how he died, but how he lived. It's cathartic to put it out there and to see supportive responses from strangers who understood. That's what this day does. It builds solidarity. It says our grief is acknowledged on a global stage. And by acknowledging the grief, IOAD also challenges the shame. No longer is an overdose death something that families have to whisper about or hide. We are literally shouting their names from the rooftop, honoring them publicly. The theme, One Big Family, Driven by Hope, for 2025 IOAD that I mentioned encapsulates the spirit I've witnessed. When I attend our local IOAD vigil, I see parents who have lost children, embracing folks who are in recovery, and remembering their fallen friends. I see health workers exchanging ideas with law enforcement officers on how to collaborate better. I see young people, some who have struggled with substances, some who haven't, lighting candles together. There's a sense that we are all in this together, and together is the only way we can solve it. As one campaign piece put it, by honoring those who have died and supporting those in recovery, we can transform loss into prevention and solidarity. That's a hopeful message, that our collective remembrance can drive collective action. As we wrap up, I want to thank you for staying with me through this episode. It's raw, it's personal, and it matters. As we come toward the conclusion of this discussion, I want to reflect on a couple of personal lessons and takeaways. Losing Jordan has been the hardest thing I've ever experienced. It left a permanent scar, but it also ignited a fire in me to make sure his death was not in vain. If sharing his story can convince even one person to carry naloxone, or persuade one person struggling with opioids to be careful or seek help, or open one listener's mind about the need for compassion, then something positive comes out of this pain. One surprising thing I learned in the aftermath of Jordan's passing was the importance of being prepared for the practical realities of an unexpected death. Estate planning is probably the last thing anyone wants to think about in relation to a 32-year-old in the prime of life. Jordan certainly hadn't been thinking about wills or life insurance. My family found ourselves not only grief-stricken, but also scrambling to figure out bank accounts, bills, his belongings, all those administrative things that hit you when someone dies without a plan. It felt cruel to deal with paperwork while we were in shock and sorrow. This might seem like a tangent, but I mention it because it's a real part of the story. It taught me that planning for the unexpected is an act of love we can give our families. I would encourage everyone, especially young adults who might feel invincible, to have at least some conversations about what you'd want if something happened, and if all possible, put basic legal documents in place, a will, an advance directive, designated beneficiaries on accounts. I know it's uncomfortable to contemplate, but having those affairs in order can spare your loved ones additional heartache in an already devastating time. It's a small piece of wisdom I wish we'd had before, and while it doesn't change the emotional toll, it does make the aftermath a bit less chaotic for those left behind. That said, my main focus remains on prevention, doing everything we can do so that fewer families have to go through what mine did. International Overdose Awareness Day is a beacon of hope in that regard. It not only memorializes those lost, but also rallies people to demand change and to implement life-saving measures today. It reminds us that every overdose death is preventable. If a person gets the right help at the right time, if someone is there with naloxone, if policies encourage safety rather than drive people into hiding, that person can be saved. We have to build a world where help is there when it's needed. I want to end on a note of hope and a call to action. Earlier, I mentioned that overdose deaths in the U.S. might have declined in the last year. That shows that our collective efforts can make a difference. Each life saved is proof that what we do matters. Maybe you listening today will be the one to save a life tomorrow by pulling someone back from the edge with Narcan, or by guiding a friend toward treatment, or by influencing community leaders to invest in solutions. You have that power. We all do. On this International Overdose Awareness Day, I invite you to do two things: remember and act. If you've lost someone, speak their name, share their photo, tell their story. Refuse to let stigma silence your love for them. And then channel that love into action, big or small. It could be educating your kids, volunteering, donating, advocating, or simply showing kindness to someone who is battling addiction. All of it counts. All of it is part of the change. For my part, I remember my brother Jordan, a bright, beautiful soul who should still be here. I carry his memory with me in this work, and I act in his name, hoping that maybe I can help prevent another Jordan from being lost. In a way, through me and through all who loved him, he is still here, fighting to save others. Thank you for listening to this deeply personal episode and for caring about this issue. Overdose Awareness Day is one day on the calendar, but its message and mission must live on every day. Let's keep our hearts open, our minds informed, and our efforts united. Time to remember. Time to act in memory of Jordan and all the precious lives gone too soon. Together, as one big family driven by hope, let's work toward a future where overdoses are a rarity, not an everyday occurrence. A future where we no longer lose 100,000 bright lights a year, and where families like mine get to keep our loved ones with us, healthy and whole. Stay safe, take care of each other, and let's end overdose for good. That's it for this special episode of POMpod. On this International Overdose Awareness Day and every day, let's remember, let's act, and let's keep building a world where fewer families have to carry this kind of grief. If this episode moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to connect, learn more, or find resources, check out the links in the show notes. Until next time, this is POMpod. Take care of yourselves and each other.